Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
My name is Christina Langley, and this is the story of how I lost everything that was expected of me and found everything I never knew I needed. It started with exhaustion, not the kind you fix with a vacation to the Hamptons or a weekend spa. Retreat. This was bone-deep fatigue that made every boardroom meeting feel like climbing Mount Everest. Every charity gala like performing in a play where I'd forgotten all my lines. At 28, I was the golden child of Langley Industries, groomed since birth to take over my father's empire. But my body was staging a rebellion my mind couldn't ignore. "You need rest," Dr. Morrison had said, his expression grave as he reviewed my test results. "Real rest. Your cortisol levels are through the roof. Your blood pressure is concerning for someone your age. And frankly, Ms. Langley, you're running yourself into the ground." That's when my assistant, Marcus, mentioned Eva Santos. "She's this holistic health practitioner," he'd said, sliding a business card across my mahogany desk. "Word is she works miracles with high-stress executives. Very discreet, very effective." I almost laughed. A holistic practitioner? My father would have a coronary. Gregory Langley believed in two things: results and tradition. Anything that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or stock prices was viewed with the same suspicion he reserved for competitors trying to undercut our market share. But desperation makes hypocrites of us all. Eva Santos arrived at my penthouse on a Tuesday morning, carrying what looked like a small pharmacy in canvas bags. I'd been expecting someone older, perhaps wearing flowing scarves and speaking in mystical metaphors about chakras and energy fields. Instead, I opened the door to find a woman about my age with intelligent dark eyes, practical sneakers, and the kind of confident smile that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. "Miss Langley," she said, extending a firm handshake. "I'm Eva. Thank you for trusting me with your health." Her voice had this quality warm honey with just a hint of authority. I found myself studying her face longer than was professionally appropriate, noting the way her hair caught the morning light filtering through my floor-to-ceiling windows. "Please call me Christina," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "And I should warn you, I'm probably your most skeptical client." She laughed, a sound that seemed to fill spaces I didn't know were empty. Good. Skeptics ask the right questions. That first session, she had me lie on my own couch while she assessed what she called my stress patterns. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she checked my pulse points, the tension in my shoulders, the way I breathed. There was nothing inappropriate about her touch. It was clinical, professional. But there was something about the way she focused on me, completely present in a way that no one in my world ever was, that made my skin feel hyper-aware. "You hold everything right here," she said, her fingers finding a knot of tension between my shoulder blades. "It's like you've been carrying the weight of the world." "Just the weight of Langley Industries," I murmured, then immediately regretted the admission. I didn't discuss family business with outsiders. But Eva didn't press for details. She simply continued her assessment, occasionally making notes in a leather journal. When she finished, she sat back and studied me with those penetrating eyes. "Your body is screaming for rest, but your mind won't let you," she observed. "We need to teach them how to work together instead of against each other." Over the following weeks, Eva became a fixture in my life. She introduced me to meditation practices that actually worked, herbal teas that tasted like comfort in a cup, and gentle stretches that seemed to unknot years of tension. But more than that, she introduced me to moments of stillness I'd never allowed myself. I began looking forward to our sessions with an anticipation that felt dangerous. The way she moved through my space with quiet confidence, the way she listened without judgment when stress made me ramble about impossible deadlines and family expectations, the way she tucked wayward strands of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, it all became part of a routine that felt more essential than any board meeting. 3 weeks into our arrangement, Eva was guiding me through a particularly challenging stretch when I felt her fingers linger just a second too long on my wrist as she adjusted my position. My breath caught not from the stretch, but from the sudden awareness of her proximity, the warmth of her skin, the faint scent of lavender that seemed to follow her everywhere. "Is this part of the treatment?" I found myself asking, my voice carrying a teasing tone I hadn't intended. "Flustering your patience?" Ava's eyes met mine, and I saw something shift there, a recognition, a spark of awareness that matched my own. Her thumb brushed across my wrist as she checked my pulse, and I knew she could feel how fast my heart was racing. "Only the pretty ones," she said with a smirk that made my stomach flip. The moment stretched between us, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. I'd never been flustered by a woman before. Hell, I'd rarely been flustered by anyone. The Langley conditioning ran too deep for such displays of vulnerability. But Eva wasn't just anyone. She was brilliant and confident and completely unlike anyone in my carefully curated world. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over, the way she'd looked at me, the way my body had responded, the way something inside me had recognized something inside her, like finding a frequency I'd never known. I was searching for. I was terrified. The following week brought a hostile takeover, attempt that had my father in crisis mode and me working 18-hour days to protect our assets. I fell back into old patterns, skipping meals, surviving on coffee, pushing my body past its limits until Eva found me at 3 a.m., hunched over my laptop on the penthouse terrace. "You're awake," I said without looking up from my screen. "So are you," she replied. She was holding one of her herbal tea blends, steam rising like incense in the cool night air. I wanted to explain about the takeover, about the emergency board, meetings, and the legal maneuvers required to protect everything my grandfather had built. Instead, I found myself closing the laptop and really looking at her for the first time in days. She was beautiful in the moonlight, not the polished, calculated beauty of the women in my social circle, but something more natural, more real. Her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and she wore an oversized sweater that made her look younger, more approachable. "I think about you," I heard myself say, the words tumbling out before I could stop them, "more than I should." The admission hung between us like a bridge I'd just burned. Eva set down her tea and turned to face me fully, her expression unreadable. In the silver light, Christina ... "I know it's complicated," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know I'm your client. I know you're probably straight. I know my family would lose their minds if they knew I was even thinking." "I'm not straight," she interrupted softly. The world seemed to pause. Everything I'd been afraid to hope crystallized in that moment, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She moved closer, and I could see the uncertainty in her eyes warring with something that looked like want. Her fingers traced my jaw with infinite gentleness, and I felt like I was made of spun glass, fragile and precious. "Tell me to stop," she whispered. That I couldn't. I'd spent 28 years being the perfect daughter, the ideal heiress, the woman everyone expected me to be. For once in my life, I wanted to be the woman I actually was. When she kissed me, it was like coming home to a place I'd never been. Soft and sure and full of promise. Her lips tasted like the chamomile tea she'd been drinking, and her hands were gentle as they cupped my face like I was something worth treasuring. I'd been kissed before, of course. Acceptable men at acceptable events, all orchestrated by my Father's careful matchmaking, but this was different. This was choice. This was desire. This was the first time in my life I understood what all the songs and poems were actually about. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ava rested, her forehead against mine. "What are we doing?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I don't want to stop." For 2 months, we existed in a bubble of stolen moments and secret touches. Eva would arrive for our sessions, and we'd spend half the time actually working on my stress management and the other half, learning each other's bodies with the desperate intensity of people who knew their time was borrowed. She taught me things about myself I'd never imagined. That I had a sensitive spot just below my left ear that made me gasp when she kissed it. That I could be strong and vulnerable at the same time. That love didn't have to be a weakness. It could be a source of strength I'd never tapped into. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, especially when you're living under the microscope that comes with a Langley name. I was in my office reviewing quarterly projections when Marcus burst in looking like he'd seen a ghost. He was carrying a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, which should have been my first clue that something was terribly wrong. "Christina," he said, his voice tight with panic. "We have a problem." The headline screamed across the front page in bold letters: "Langley heiress in scandalous affair with nurse." Below, it was a photograph that made my blood turn to ice. Eva and me on my terrace, caught in a moment of intimacy that had clearly been taken with a telephoto lens from the building across the street. My hands were shaking as I read the article. It painted Eva as a manipulative opportunist who had seduced me for money and position, and me as a confused young woman being taken advantage of by someone clearly outside her social class. Every word was poison, designed to humiliate and destroy. "How did they get this?" I whispered. Marcus looked miserable. "Someone's been watching you for weeks." The photos, the source quotes, "This was planned, Christina." Someone wanted to destroy you. I knew exactly who that someone was. 20 minutes later, I was standing in my father's office while he sat behind his desk like a king pronouncing judgment. The newspaper lay open between us, damning evidence of my rebellion. "End it," he said without preamble, his voice cold. "As January, or you're cut off." "Dad, this is not a negotiation, Christina." He stood up, his imposing figure casting shadows across the Persian rug. "I will not have the Langley name dragged through the mud because you decided to experiment with some fortune-hunting nurse." The words hit like physical blows. "She's not a fortune hunter. She's brilliant and kind, and she makes me happy." "Happy?" Gregory laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think happiness matters when our stock price drops because of this scandal? You think happiness pays for the lifestyle you've enjoyed your entire life?" I stared at this man who was supposed to love me unconditionally, who was supposed to want my happiness above all else. Instead, I saw a businessman calculating losses, a patriarch protecting his legacy at any cost. "She makes me better," I said quietly. "I was killing myself trying to be perfect for you, and she saved me." "She's destroyed you," he corrected. "And if you don't end this immediately, you'll lose everything. Your trust fund, your position in the company, your place in this family. Choose wisely, Christina. Some mistakes can't be undone." That night, I sat in my empty penthouse and cried until I had no tears left. Eva found me there hours later, her face pale with the knowledge that our secret was out. "I saw the paper," she said simply. I couldn't look at her. "My father wants me to end this. Us. And what do you want?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. What did I want? I wanted to run away with her to somewhere no one knew the Langley name. I wanted to build a life based on love instead of legacy. I wanted to wake up every morning knowing I was living authentically instead of performing a role I'd never auditioned for. But I also wanted financial security, professional respect, the safety net that came with being Gregory Langley's daughter. I'd never lived without those things. I didn't know if I could. I want both, I whispered. I want you and I want my family, and I want it not to matter what anyone thinks. Eva sat down beside me on the couch where we'd shared so many intimate moments. But that's not how the world works, is it? Her bags were already packed. I could see them by the door, a physical reminder that this fairy tale was ending. I won't be the reason you lose everything, she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. I grabbed her wrist, holding on like she was the only thing keeping me from drowning. You're not taking anything from me. You're the reason. I found myself. And what version of yourself will be left when your family disowns you? When you can't afford this apartment or the life you've always known? When you resent me for what you gave up? The questions were daggers, each one hitting fears I hadn't been brave enough to voice. But looking at her, really looking at this woman who had changed everything about how I saw myself and the world, I knew there was only one answer that mattered. I'd rather be broke with you than rich without you. But even as I said the words, even as I meant them with every fiber of my being, I could see the doubt in her eyes. She'd grown up without the safety net I'd always taken for granted. She knew what it meant to struggle, to worry about money, to rebuild from nothing. And she loved me too much to let me make a choice I might regret. She kissed me one last time, soft and desperate and full of goodbye. If this is meant to be, she whispered against my lips, we'll find a way back to each other. Then she was gone, taking with her the best parts of who I'd been becoming. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. I threw myself into work with the kind of manic energy that bordered on self-destruction. I attended every board meeting, every charity gala, every family obligation with the mechanical precision of a well-programmed robot. My father was pleased. Stock prices stabilized. The scandal faded from the headlines, replaced by newer, fresher gossip about other prominent families. From the outside, it looked like I'd learned my lesson, fallen back in line, become the daughter he'd always wanted me to be. Inside, I was dying. I thought about Eva constantly. I wondered where she was, whether she'd found another client too. Help, whether she ever thought about those stolen moments on my terrace. I kept her herbal teas in my kitchen cabinet like talismans, occasionally making them when the loneliness became unbearable, trying to conjure her presence through chamomile and lavender. The worst part was the numbness. I'd been so alive during our time together, so present in my own body and mind. Without her, I went back to being a ghost in my own life, going through the motions without feeling any of it. I tried dating acceptable men. Gregory introduced me to sons of business associates, senators' sons, anyone with the right pedigree and political connections. I smiled and made conversation and let them hold my hand at symphony performances. But their touches felt like obligations, their kisses like business transactions. None of them saw me the way Eva had, as someone worth knowing beyond my last name and trust fund balance. 6 months after she left, I was reviewing contracts in my office when I found myself staring out the window at nothing. Ava's voice echoing in my memory. Your body is screaming for rest, but your mind won't let you. We need to teach them how to work together instead of against each other. That's when I realized something crucial. She hadn't just been talking about stress management. She'd been talking about integration, bringing all the parts of myself into alignment instead of compartmentalizing everything into acceptable and unacceptable pieces. I'd spent my entire life trying to be what other people wanted, but she'd seen who I actually was underneath all that performance. And she'd loved that person, the real me, not the Langley heiress or the perfect daughter or the corporate shark. but the woman who laughed at terrible movies and cried during commercials with animals and wanted nothing more than to build something meaningful with someone who understood her. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I started small. Instead of diving headfirst into rebellion, I began researching the wellness industry with the same thoroughness I applied to hostile takeover defenses. I read studies about holistic health practices, attended conferences on integrative medicine, and quietly reached out to professionals who were building bridges between traditional and alternative approaches to healthcare. What I found was a growing market of people like me, high-functioning professionals who are burning out at alarming rates, looking for solutions that addressed more than just symptoms. There was real money to be made in helping people live more integrated lives, but most practitioners lack the business acumen to scale their practices effectively. It was a problem I knew how to solve. I started writing a business plan, not just any business plan, a comprehensive strategy for creating a consulting firm that would connect holistic health practitioners with corporate clients, providing stress, management, and wellness programs to executives who needed them most. It would be legitimate, profitable, and positioned perfectly to capitalize on growing trends toward employee wellness and mental health awareness in the workplace. More importantly, it would require a certain holistic health practitioner with an exceptional track record and deep understanding of high-stress environments. I spent months refining every detail. One, researched competitors, identified target markets, calculated projected revenues, and developed marketing strategies that would appeal to both corporate executives and wellness professionals. I even found investors discreetly through contacts who wouldn't immediately report back to my father. The hardest part was finding Eva. She'd changed her phone number, moved from her old apartment, and seemed to have disappeared entirely from my world. I finally tracked her down through a friend of a friend who'd heard she was working at a small clinic in Portland, helping patients recover from chronic stress and anxiety. I flew there on a Friday afternoon, my hands shaking as the plane descended, through gray clouds that reminded me of her eyes. I hadn't seen her in 8 months, and I had no idea if she'd even want to talk to me. But I had to try. The clinic was nothing like my penthouse, small, warm, filled with plants and soft music and the kind of peaceful energy that felt like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. Eva was working with a client when I arrived, her voice carrying through the thin walls as she guided someone through breathing exercises. I waited in the reception area, my business plan clutched in sweaty palms, trying to figure out what I'd say when I saw her again. Part of me expected her to be angry that I tracked her down. Part of me feared she'd moved on, found someone else, built a life that didn't include space for complicated heiresses with trust fund problems. When she finally emerged from the treatment room, she stopped dead in her tracks. For a moment, neither of us moved. She looked different, healthier somehow, like she'd been getting enough sleep and eating regular meals. Her hair was shorter, framing her face in a way that made her eyes look enormous. Christina. My name sounded rusty in her voice, like she hadn't said it in months. Hi, I managed. Can we talk? She glanced around the small waiting area, then nodded toward a door marked private. Her office was tiny but efficient, with a desk covered in patient files and a small window that looked out onto a garden. You look good, she said, settling into the chair across from me. I look like hell, I corrected. I haven't slept properly since you left. A shadow crossed her face. Christina, if you're here I have a business proposition. I interrupted, then immediately regretted how corporate that sounded. I mean, I have an idea for us, if you're interested. I spent the next hour walking her through my business plan, explaining how we could build something together that would be legitimate, profitable, and meaningful. A consulting firm that specialized in executive wellness, combining her expertise with my business connections and marketing knowledge. We'd be partners, I concluded, my heart hammering against my ribs, equal partners. In business and in life, if you'll have me. Ava stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her processing not just the business opportunity, but what I was really asking. Your father will disown you, she said quietly. Probably. But I've been thinking about that a lot, and here's the thing: I don't want to inherit a legacy built on fear and control. I want to build something of my own, something that matters, something that helps people instead of just making money. And if it fails, I reached across the desk and took her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in mine. Then at least I'll fail doing something I believe in with someone I love. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a terrible moment, I thought she was going to say no. Instead, she squeezed my fingers and smiled that devastating smile I'd been dreaming about for months. Langley Santos Wellness, she asked. I was thinking Santos Langley, I said. Your name first. You're the one with the actual expertise. She laughed, and the sound filled all the empty spaces in my chest that had been aching since she left. I missed you, she whispered. I missed you too, every day, every minute. This time when she kissed me, it wasn't desperate or stolen or shadowed by the fear of discovery. It was a promise, a beginning, a choice we were making together. The next year was the hardest and most rewarding of my life. As predicted, Gregory cut me off completely when I announced I was leaving Langley Industries to start my own company with Eva. He froze my trust fund, removed me from the company board, and made it clear that I was no longer welcome at family events. It hurt more than I'd expected. Losing a parent's love, even conditional love, leaves scars that take years to heal. But for the first time in my life, I was living authentically, and that authenticity gave me strength I'd never known I possessed. Eva and I found a small office space in Manhattan, nothing fancy but filled with natural light and close enough to the corporate district to attract our target clientele. We spent weeks painting walls, assembling furniture from IKEA, and arguing about everything from color schemes to business card fonts. Those early months were lean. We lived off Ava's savings and my dwindling checking account while we built our client base one executive at a time. I learned to live without a trust fund, discovered the difference between wanting something and needing it, and found that most of what I thought was essential was actually just expensive habit, that we were building something beautiful. Our approach worked, combining Ava's holistic health expertise with corporate-friendly packages that included stress management workshops, executive wellness programs, and one-on-one coaching for high-level burnout cases. Word spread quickly through Manhattan's business community that Santos Langley Wellness got results without requiring anyone to chant or burn sage in their corner office. More importantly, Ava and I were building a life together. We found a small apartment in Brooklyn, nothing like my old penthouse, but filled with plants and good light, and the kind of peace that comes from living with someone who truly knows you. We adopted a cat named Sage who had strong opinions about meditation music and insisted on participating in all our home yoga sessions. The night before our official grand opening, I found Ava on our fire escape, looking out over the city lights with the same contemplative expression she'd worn that night on my penthouse terrace. Second thoughts? I asked, settling beside her. Third and fourth thoughts, she admitted. What if we fail? What if I'm not good enough for this level of business? What if your father was right and I really am just a nurse who got lucky? I took her hand, running my thumb over the simple silver ring she wore on her middle finger. Do you remember what you told me that first day? About teaching my body and mind to work together instead of against each other? She nodded. That's what we're doing. We're taking your gift for healing and my gift for business and creating something neither of us could build alone. That's not luck, Eva. That's partnership. She leaned against my shoulder, and I breathed in the scent of lavender that still followed her everywhere. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, enough to give up everything for you. Enough to build everything with you. The lunch party for Santos Langley Wellness exceeded every expectation. Our small office was packed with potential clients, current patients, and industry professionals who'd heard about our innovative approach to executive wellness. The champagne flowed, business cards were exchanged, and several major corporations booked initial consultations on the spot. I was networking with a pharmaceutical company VP when I spotted a familiar figure near the back of the room. Gregory Langley stood apart from the crowd, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. For a moment, our eyes met across the room. I saw surprise there, and perhaps a grudging respect for what we built. But when he realized I'd noticed him, he simply nodded once and disappeared into the crowd. I never spoke to him that night, but his presence meant something. Maybe not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. Recognition that his daughter had built something real and valuable, even if it wasn't what he would have chosen for her. Later, after the last guest had left and we'd cleaned up the champagne glasses and networking debris, Eva and I stood alone in our office space, looking around at the evidence of our impossible dream made manifest. We did it, she said, wonder in her voice. We did. She turned to face me, and I saw my whole future in her eyes. Not the future I'd been groomed for, not the safe path that would have led to a corner office in my father's company, but something infinitely more precious. A future built on love and partnership and the radical idea that success should be measured in more than just profit margins. Christina Langley, she said, dropping to one knee right there among the empty champagne glasses and scattered business. Cards. I don't have a ring. I don't have a speech planned. But I have a question. My heart stopped. And all my fantasies about this moment, I'd never imagined it would happen here in our messy little office that still smelled like fresh paint and new furniture. But somehow it was perfect us creating our own moment in the space we built. Together, will you marry me? She asked. Will you build a life with me that's bigger than either of us could create alone? Will you be my partner in every sense of the word? I kissed her instead of answering with words, pouring every yes I ever felt into that single moment of connection. When we finally broke apart, both of us were crying and laughing and holding each other like we were afraid this might all disappear. If we let go, is that a yes? She asked against my lips. That's a yes to everything, I said. Yes to marriage, yes to partnership, yes to building something beautiful together. Yes to all of it. Today, Santos Langley Wellness employs 12 people and has offices in 3 cities. We've been featured in Forbes and Harvard Business Review. Eva speaks at conferences about the intersection of holistic health and corporate wellness, while I've written 2 books about building purpose-driven businesses. More importantly, we're happy. Genuinely, deeply, daily happy in a way that still surprises me sometimes. We wake up excited about our work, grateful for each other, and committed to building something that matters. Gregory and I speak now, carefully and occasionally. He never apologized for cutting me off, but he did attend our wedding sitting. In the back row, stone-faced but present, baby steps toward reconciliation, mediated by my mother, who confessed she'd been secretly proud of my courage, even when she couldn't say so publicly. The society pages still whisper sometimes, especially when we appear together at fundraisers or industry events. But now I just laugh, lacing my fingers with Ava's and thinking about how much energy I used to waste caring what strangers thought about my life. Let them talk, I tell Eva when she notices the stares and whispered conversations. Doesn't it bother you anymore? She asks. I consider this seriously, looking around at the charity gala where we're representing our company. surrounded by the kind of people I used to think defined success. You know what bothers me? The idea that I might have lived my whole life trying to make them happy while making myself miserable. Everything else is just noise. She smiles that devastating smile that still makes my stomach flip after 5 years of marriage, and I think about how lucky I am. Not lucky to be rich, not lucky to be well connected, but lucky to have found someone who saw through all my careful performances to the person underneath. Lucky to have been brave enough to choose love over safety, authenticity over approval. We've built something beautiful together, not just a business, but a life that reflects our values, our love, our commitment to helping other people find balance in a world that seems designed to drive everyone toward burnout. Every day brings new challenges, new clients, new opportunities to make a difference. And every night, I get to come home to the woman who changed everything about how I see myself and the world. That teenage girl who used to lie awake worrying about living up to the Langley name would be amazed to know that the secret to happiness wasn't living up to anyone else's expectations. It was having the courage to discover what I actually wanted and the strength to build it with someone who believed in me completely. Sometimes love doesn't just change your life, it saves it. Ava didn't just help me manage my stress. She helped me reclaim my soul. And in return, I got to be part of something bigger than both of us, something that makes the world a little bit better every day. They say you can't have it all, but I think that's wrong. You can't have everything everyone else wants for you, but you can absolutely have everything you want for yourself if you're brave enough to reach for it and smart enough to build it with the right person. This is our story, not a fairy tale, but something better. A love story where both people grow, where partnership means bringing out the best in each other, where success is measured in happiness and purpose rather than profit margins and social approval. And we're still writing it one day at a time together.